Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Generalist. And for those of you who are coming for the first time, welcome. I know I've been gone for a little bit, but I'm back. I have a bunch of episodes recorded, more scheduled. I'll be releasing on a regular schedule again. Thank you for being patient with me. It takes a lot of time sometimes to get guests, to record the episodes, to edit and do all that stuff. If you'd like to help us keep that going on a more regular basis and hopefully eventually on an even more often basis, I guess we can say, help us by donating at thegeneralistpodcast.com. Use our Amazon link. And soon we will have a Patreon account as well up where you could help donate in that way. But that's enough about that. I have a great episode for you guys today. I sat down with Christopher Kelly and Todd Galen from Consciousness Hackers NYC. We talked about consciousness, about the nature of reality, a bit about Buddhism, a bit about technology, a little bit of everything. It was really interesting. I had a great time. I hope you did too. Enjoy. If you want to hear any other information, how to contact me, all that other general business stuff, tune in at the end of the episode. Like, where the credits are. Welcome to The Generalist, a show with a man who knows very little bit about a lot. A man who specializes in nothing in particular. A man who knows that he knows nothing. A man who can be described as non-specific. And to top it off, he narrates his own intros. This is The Generalist with your host, Saul Ackerman. I'll edit it as necessary.
But for me, the holiday season,
The holiday season being
is.
April 19th, April 20th.
Well, I started to take it more seriously last year because I was at the Rubin, and
What is the Rubin?
the Rubin Museum of Himalayan Art is probably one of the only art museums in the world solely dedicated to art from the Himalayan region. So that means northern India, Tibet, Nepal. Don Rubin was a very wealthy person. I think he made his money through the dry cleaning business or something. I don't know. But he's he's a New York entrepreneur who had a private collection that I guess just got too big. And through his generosity, opened it up to the public and bought this space off of 6th Avenue in Manhattan. I think it's 15th Street. And it used to be a department store, Barney's. It's like 3 floors. It's quite psychedelic, actually, in its architecture. And he created what's now called the Rubin Museum of Art, and has become a real New York institution.
I gotta check it out. I've never.
Oh, you gotta check it out.
Yeah, I will.
It's a wonderful place. And Tim McHenry, the guy that does the programming there, really goes out of his way to make connections to pop culture and to bring, I think, the museum into a very proactive space where people really are doing things, not just sort of passively walking past things. But I was at the Rubin for a lecture, and I think it might have been a Buddhism and psychedelic event. I can't even remember. But Julie Holland, who is a psychedelic, I would describe her as a psychedelic therapist. Not sure how she self-identifies, but
Is she, when you say a psychedelic therapist, is she a psychologist who's practicing with psychedelics? Or...
yeah. Well, nobody can say that because it's illegal. But
Right, she's totally not doing that.
But she is a intellectual, scientific proponent who can talk about psychedelics in that context, in a therapeutic context.
Oh, interesting.
She's written a couple books, and she worked at Bellevue, and as I understand it, she pretty much created a kind of informal psychedelic triage there because of her own personal study of psychedelics. She was able to recognize when other people were coming into Bellevue on a psychedelic trip, and rather than trauma.
Oh, interesting. I thought you meant the psychedelic triage, like, what drug would I give this person?
No.
You're saying, what drug are they on?
Yeah.
Got it.
So when psychedelic casualties would wind up in Bellevue, she would see the signs, and rather than putting them through this traumatic experience of pumping their stomach and sticking them in a room with fluorescent lights and sort of, poking and prodding, she would help them. So I guess the best way to describe her is She's a master of harm reduction in the field of
Let
psychology.
me get the door. I think that's
Yeah.
Todd.
Go right
And
ahead.
I'll get your coffee as well.
Oh, thanks. Do you want to stop?
No, just keep recording.
Okay.
I'll edit it later. So we were just talking about the psychopharmacologist.
Yeah, so the appropriate title I think for Julie is psychopharmacologist. Anyway, so we're talking about the high holidays of psychedelics, which I don't know if this is high or medium or low, but it's a double header because we have 419 and 420.
Right.
And I heard Julie speaking at the Rubin, and she was talking about how we as normal functioning psychonauts should or could honor these holidays, and the objective being to normalize them a bit, bring them into more of the mainstream, and really to try to dispel a lot of the bad propaganda that psychedelics got in the
drug war.
In the drug war.
Yeah.
So she said something like, on 420, I'll wear a green pin to work on my lapel, and people will ask me about that, and I'll explain to them. And it really goes a long way in sort of educating people and dispelling the stigma associated with these substances. So I heard that, and it really resonated with me because I'm a teacher, I'm a college professor, and I oftentimes talk about, if not, just actually teach the subject of psychedelics. So anyway, I made a note of that, and when 419 rolled around this year, I actually had a class that day, and we do cover psychedelics. It's a class on Buddhism and cognitive science.
Oh, super cool.
And one of the sections is psychedelics.
I guess I should introduce you guys.
Yeah,
you're Chris. What's your last? Chris Kelly, right?
Yeah. So
do you prefer Chris or Christopher?
My name's Christopher, and most people call me Chris.
Chris. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going back and forth on the emails. I wasn't sure which one you preferred. And Todd, last name?
Galen.
Todd Galen.
Yeah.
And you're an engineer, correct?
No, I guess I'm jack of all trades, master of none.
Oh, that's perfect for the generalist.
Interested in a lot of different things. No, I currently I founded a startup about 4 years ago called Sensoka, and I hate the word pivot because I feel like it's just like.
Can you bring the mic a little closer to me?
Of course. Yeah.
You can move it up and down, whatever you want.
Yeah.
It'll stay.
Yeah, so I currently run a company called Sensoka, and we've gone through a couple different iterations of, I guess, the new thing. And the first proposed new thing was a watch to measure specific physiological signals at your wrist as a means of detecting emotions. And that didn't fly. And then we developed some software that we wanted to develop as a platform, as a service, if you will, for different kind of wearable hardware platforms. So we wanted the goal was to kind of license the software to different wearable platforms like a Apple Watch, like different fashion technology companies like Nike or Adidas or Under Armour that are putting sensors into their clothing, like companies like a company called MC10 in Cambridge, which has developed they call it a digital tattoo. So it's basically a flexible, bendable sensor you put on your skin. So the goal was, okay, well, if in fact the science exists, and it does, that if you can detect these specific physiological signals like your heart rate and your skin temperature, you actually can detect someone's emotional state. So we thought that was all really kind of cool. And where we are right now, I'm actually pretty excited. My business partner's up in Montreal. Kind of serendipitously, we came across this one paper that this woman at MIT wrote. Her name's Roz Picard. She's the effective computing pioneer. We discovered that there was this scientist who, back in the 60s, showed that if you actually measure if you ask someone to express an emotion with their finger on a flat surface, the way that they express different emotions, whether it be anger or fear or disgust, for about 9 specific emotions, the pattern you use with your finger is exactly the same.
Oh,
so if you think about anger, right? If I asked you guys to express anger, how would you express anger on this table right here, Sal? Exactly. You probably do it again and again and again.
Yeah, probably.
So what's funny is like there are these universally consistent patterns in these different systems in the body, whether it be the central nervous system, whether it be the face, whether it be the autonomic nervous system, and also the finger. So she has, and I'm really excited about this. We're actually going to launch this API in 2 months. It's been kind of a long 4 years, as I just described, with these different kind of ideas, software products. So we're making this bet that the future of human-machine, human-computer interaction, touchscreens, if you will, is right now we're touching our screens all the time. Well, what if the way that you basically interact with your screen with your fingers, whatever platform you're on, whether it be Facebook or Netflix or whatever it is, it could capture actually how you feel, right? I mean, ultimately, I'm not suggesting that we're gonna. Who knows where we're going to be, if it's going to work. Hopefully it's going to work. But if you're a good game designer, you can actually integrate this motion detection touchscreen technology into your game such that when someone's interacting with your game, you know exactly how they feel. So that's kind of
That's
I
pretty
guess I'm a
cool.
serial entrepreneur. Began my career in Wall Street, and that's what I'm in the emotion detection business and the consciousness hacking business.
Well, it makes me think we should have you as a consciousness hacking guest. And
Once the API is up and running, I would love.
we should do it after that.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's what I was gonna say. I got you guys here because you are, or how I met you guys, was through a group called Consciousness Hacking,
Right.
where you guys have meetups. And what exactly do you guys do at Consciousness Hacking? And we will go back to the psychedelic stuff. I didn't forget.
It's funny because the reason I want to go back to that story is it's occupied my attention pretty much continuously since last night.
So let's just jump straight to it.
But I think we should say something about consciousness hacking. So consciousness hacking is a movement in the truest sense. I think it's grassroots driven. And we did not start it, but we did start the New York City chapter. So the actual idea, the phrase consciousness hacking, comes out of the Bay Area and was coined by Mikey Siegel, who started the first consciousness hacking meetup group. And his story, I think, is kind of, I've made this comparison to the chagrin of many devout Buddhists. But I think they kind of missed the point. I think Mikey's story resembles the life story of the Buddha, and that's not to say that Mikey's some sort of god, but to say that the life story of the Buddha is a monomyth and a story for all of us. So it's sort of, bringing Buddha down into the realm of normal people.
Isn't he sort of supposed to be anyway?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. He's not Buddhists are atheists. So anyway, Mikey's story in a nutshell is he's a computer engineer, had a lot of success with that, realized a lot of his monetary goals, but was still wanting, I think, in the realm of spirituality. Basically found that well-being is not something you can derive from material ends, although it might help. So he started looking into meditation and Eastern spirituality, and because of his engineering background, it wasn't long before he started tinkering and coming up with ideas for gadgets or apps or anything technological that would facilitate and support his meditative spiritual pursuits. And out of that, you have consciousness hacking. Now, we've done our own thing, and Todd can add to this, in New York, which is partly based on just the fact that we are a unique city. We're different from Silicon Valley. We have different human resources. We have a lot of human resources here. And also, I think it's the nature of consciousness hacking, to Mikey's credit, to be a kind of bottom-up movement that allows for individual chapters to really give it their own spin, to give consciousness hacking their own sort of definition.
Right, that's fair. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree. What can I add to that?
You don't have to. I'm just.
Well,
if you want to, you're more than welcome to. By the way, this is your water.
Yeah, so just in terms of me, I had I organized one of the first TEDx events in New York City about 6 or 7 years ago called TEDx Gotham. Then I did another TEDx, which I chose, speaking of the monomyth and the hero's journey, the theme was the hero's journey. And actually I was doing a lot of yoga, and I became a certified 200-hour yoga teacher, which basically means I'm certified to teach a whole lot of nothing. But it was a great way to enhance my experience, and that's where I actually was exposed to the Bhagavad Gita and a lot of these different, I guess, Hindu and a few, I guess, Buddhist texts as well. But I guess what I wanted to say was that kind of was my I don't know, maybe my more sincere, formal introduction to a spiritual path, if you will. And so I began actually studying the Bhagavad Gita with a bunch of Hare Krishna monks, began actually cooking breakfast with a bunch of these monks in the East Village at this place called the Bhakti Center.
Yeah.
And
I think I've heard of it.
Sorry?
I think I've heard of the Bhakti Center.
Yeah, it's a great place. I'm actually going there this weekend to study the Enneagram.
Is that right?
What is the Enneagram?
So if you get me back here next time, or maybe on Monday, I can tell you a bit more about it. But from what I understand, and maybe you know a bit more about it than I do, the Enneagram, I think it's an idea that was inspired or discovered by Gurdjieff. Speaking of Russian mystics, and I think what it says is that there are 9 different types, and we're all a different type. And essentially, I think there are kind of virtuous aspects to knowing your type, and then I guess basically, I guess the more you understand your type, the better you understand the degree to which this constructed personality that you've built, I guess, on top of your essence, and I'm throwing words around, but I think this is it's fair to say that this constructed personality gets in the way of you actually actualizing who you really are, actualizing your essence. And so I was told that I'm a 7, and I guess a 7 is I feel like seven's always this is maybe just the way I see it. Seven's always kind of the worst kind to be, if you will. It's the Peter Pan character. Speaking of the generalist, it's the person that wants to, is always has FOMO, always wants to do everything, but ends up doing nothing. So I'm going into it this weekend just to learn, I guess, how to be maybe a little less Peter Pan. And but I guess again, once you understand this this personality type that you've developed, you can kind of, I guess, kind of take it apart and yeah, I guess begin living a bit more in tune with who you really are.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to follow up in terms of consciousness hacking. So began studying the Bhagavad Gita with some Hare Krishna monks, and through that practice, I met one of Chris and my mutual friends, this guy Spiros, who has been a long time Ashtanga practitioner with Eddie Stern, and so Spiro, he's somebody you should have on the podcast as well.
I would love to have him if I can get him on.
Yeah,
he's
I think he's in Beirut now teaching yoga. So Spiro, when Spiro decided to kind of decamp from New York, Spiro asked me to, I guess, come on, and Chris generously asked me to become his co-organizer, and so that's how I started to help organize these meetups with Chris.
Oh, awesome! I'll ask you afterwards to give me his contact info and see if I can make that connection.
Yeah, he's a pretty
Yeah, I mean, Spiro really is the co-founder of Consciousness Hacking NYC. He was attending Mikey's meetup, and he had the idea of starting a chapter in New York, and approached me on a trip when I was out west, and we were in the Source Family Cafe, which is a kind of artifact of 70s spirituality in California. And Spiro had this idea, and I was finishing my dissertation at Columbia, and I was looking for something new and different. And so he invited me to co-found the New York City chapter. And being this itinerant yogi, it was about a year into the project, he felt, I think, that he had to go on walkabout, and went to Beirut to teach yoga. And I think he's back in the States now. I think he's in LA. But that's very much just the nature of Spiro. He goes this way and that way, and starts things, and creates interesting conversations.
Right. So as not to kill your thought that you've been thinking about for the past few days, let's go back real quick to the 419, 420, which we've been trying to get out.
So it's it was a mystical experience. I had a mystical experience last night, and there's I think when you have those experiences, you either want to keep them totally private and not tell anybody, which is kind of what the Buddhists sort of encourage you to do. They say, they being the sort of oral lineage and culture of Buddhism that I've been exposed to, encourage you to sort of keep your mouth shut and keep it to yourself, that blabbing about it sort of takes away from the experience. But I find that you can have that reaction, but you could also have the opposite reaction, which is, I want to document this. Like, I want to go on the record with this before it dissipates,
Would you say that's like a difference between Mahayana and Hinayana, where I believe Mahayana is the one that comes first, correct?
No, well, it's problematic to say. Mahayana is definitely a later development.
Mahayana is a later one,
chronologically, but that's not to say that the Theravada, otherwise known as the Hinayana, to the Mahayana. Hinayana is a pejorative term.
Oh, is it?
It means,
lesser vehicle.
Yeah,
that's right.
So
Theravada
is politically correct.
That's what I'll do in the future.
But Theravada do self-identify as the original school of Buddhism, which is itself a claim that is suspicious, but it does say something about the tradition, in that they don't recognize the later developments as authentic Buddhism. The Mahayana recognize the Theravada as authentic, but then they just add on a bunch of stuff that came later. It's a bit complicated, more complicated than that. But this distinction about not talking about your spiritual insights, I think, is just oral, cultural. That's not specific to Theravada or Mahayana. But anyway, we got on all this because we were talking about the high holidays, and I had a high holiday.
The high holidays. That's a good name for it.
And So we were talking sort of about the difference between 419 and 420, and 419, April 19th, is the holiday and celebration of Albert Hoffman's inadvertent discovery of LSD and his infamous bicycle ride home, where he had the first humankind's first LSD trip. 420 is obviously the next day, and it is a little less noble in the sense that I think it's more just based on the sort of
funny coincidence.
Yeah, and 420 being this sort of sacralized mystical number. You know, there isn't as noble a story around it, but as I was saying before, the number itself has become sacred, and I think when you know what Julie Holland was saying about being very public about it is itself I think a noble thing, you know, and is good for our society in terms of getting over this stigma, that this self-inflicted stigma that the war on drugs has created. So 419, we talked about it in my new school class. We did the whole sort of Albert Hoffman story, and then 420, you know, is the day everybody gets high, and being a deadhead. For me, that meant going to the movies and watching this special screening of the Grateful Dead movie, which I hadn't seen in probably 30 years or so.
Nice.
Is this the one that's coming out at IFC pretty soon?
This is not the new documentary.
Okay.
This is a film that was made in the 70s. It's based on footage that was taken at the Fillmore in 74. I think 3 shows at the Fillmore. And the Fillmore is, you know, the temple of music in San Francisco, and it's this sacred space that Bill Graham created, and the Grateful
Who's Bill Graham?
Bill Graham was the original producer for the Grateful Dead, did a lot in terms of promoting the Grateful Dead, but also just carving out and creating space for bands like the Grateful Dead, and doing really things that capitalists don't generally do, like providing breakfast after a show. To this day, I went to the Fillmore not so long ago to see a show, the Chris Robinson Brotherhood, and to this day, when you leave the Fillmore, everybody gets a poster and an apple.
Oh, wow.
And that's Bill Graham's signature and the kind of business that he...
What kind of apples do they pass out?
Mine was a Macintosh. And it almost made me cry.
Yeah.
All right, so the film is this, you know, it captures the Dead, I think, at their best, and it was co-directed by Jerry Garcia, and the film itself is it's not a documentary, and it's not a rock video. It is I don't know, it's like reality TV, and it's very phenomenologically rich. Like it really tries to bring you into the Grateful Dead experience of going to a show, and that includes not just the music, but everything that's happening, all the sideshows and the people and the conversations and the incidents and the security and you know, the look and the feel, the taste, the smells, it's all there. And I'd forgotten all of this. And I watched this film when I was in high school. And I watched this film when I was experimenting with psychedelics for the very first time. So in a way, this was like my first lover, you know, and I'd forgotten all of that. And going back to the movies yesterday on psychedelics was very weird, you know, because it was bringing me back to, you know, you have these state-specific memories. Yeah. So I was having this sort of recollection as the movie was unfolding of these state-specific moments that were so formative in my conceptualization of the Grateful Dead, of psychedelics, of what was good in life, what was worthwhile in life. And all these, you know, incidental figures in the movie who are just ordinary people who made an impact on me, right? And I'd forgotten all of this, and it's happening in the music and everything, and I'm really into it. And then all of a sudden there's this scene, a scene that maybe just lasts a few minutes that involves a fan who is trying to get into the show without a ticket, right? And this is the kind of stuff that they shot to give it its unique...
Its full feeling, yeah.
So he's talking to the guardian. He's saying, "Look, I do gardening for Bobby," and they're like, "Bobby who?" And he's like, "Bobby Weir, you know, in the band. I'm his gardener. Can you let me in, please?" And I'm watching this, and he's wearing this shirt, and I'm looking at the shirt, and I'm going, "That's my shirt." And I'm not talking about a T-shirt. Like
Right.
You know, you see Grateful Dead T-shirts all over the place. I'm talking about a handmade, embroidered shirt from India. And I'm like, that's my shirt. And I'm actually wearing it.
You were actually
I was
wearing it at that
wearing
moment?
the shirt at the show.
Holy shit.
This is my show shirt. This
Yeah.
is like, this is the shirt that I wear to shows, you know. And I'm looking down at my shirt, and I'm looking on the screen at his shirt, and I'm going, holy shit, it's the same goddamn shirt. And I brought the shirt with me because I got to show you, like, how unique it is, okay?
So this is a shirt you wear just to Dead shows or to all shows?
Psychedelic shows,
Okay.
you know? So
I feel like I should take a picture of your shirt and
This
make it
is-
as the cover of the episode.
this is a handmade shirt from India, right? It's got this tag, right? India imports. To describe
Wait,
it,
that
like,
says H&M. Come on, let's be honest.
Let's call it what it is.
so it's a Western style shirt where the shoulders are a patchwork of different patterns. So it's like somebody sewed a bunch of odd patches of fabric into the
Yeah.
shoulders of the shirt. So it's incredibly unique.
It's a pretty unique shirt. I
It's-
have not seen one like that before.
It's incredibly unique. So I'm watching this and I'm looking at and everything about it was the same. And I'm just like, oh my God. And I'm wearing the shirt. So now, and then he says his name. The guy in the movie says, my name's Levy. Check the list. Right? And I'm like, Levy, there's a name in the back of this shirt. I remember when I bought this shirt because I bought it vintage.
Oh, no way.
There's a name in the back here. Right? So at intermission, I run into the bathroom and I'm trying. This is at Union Square Regal Cinemas, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying. You know, it's a tight-fitting shirt, and I've got layers on. It was a cold evening, so I can't quite see. And this is not a Dead show. This is a movie in Regal Cinemas. You can't take your shirt off in the bathroom without drawing attention. So I can't take my shirt off. So I'm going nuts. Now I watch the rest of the movie, but the whole time I'm thinking, what the fuck does that name say in the back of my shirt? So after the movie ends, I'm going around looking to see if I know any of the deadheads there, and I don't recognize anybody. So then I just go into the park, and I'm walking around the park, and I'm talking on the phone to my wife, and I'm just sort of circling Washington Square Park, and I see a couple, this young couple, and one of them looks like somebody I might know. So I kind of approach him, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and I realize, no, I don't know him. But we've kind of crossed that boundary. Like I've
Right.
invaded his private space. And he says, well, you know, I'm sorry. You look disappointed. And I'm like, I am, but not because I wanted to see that person. But frankly, I just needed him to do something that I couldn't ask a stranger.
Yeah.
So this is 11:30 at Union Square last night. And he says, well, what's the favor? And his girlfriend's eyes light up. She's got this wild side of me. You know, you see it in her eyes. Like, and she says, yeah, what is it? And I'm like, and I look at her and I go, well, it's really odd. I really couldn't ask you to do this. And they had actually engaged some passerbys who were walking their dogs, just this New York couple. And they were clearly weirded out. Like they even said,
Yeah.
this is getting too weird for me. We're going to keep going. And I'm like, look, I'm really sorry. I don't mean to be the park weirdo, but I am going a little crazy. And if this is something you're willing to do, I assure you I'm not, that
Insane.
kind of weirdo.
Yeah. That's exactly what that kind of weirdo would say.
I know. And I'm thinking this the whole time. So she's like, well, I'm up for it. And I'm like, okay, so can you look in the back of my shirt and just tell me what the name says? So this is hand scrawled in the back of my shirt. And I got long hair and I've got layers on. So she's really having to dig into my person to read this. And she's like, I see it. I'm like, what does it say? Does it say Levy? And she says, no, it says Fink.
Was the guy's name Levy Fink?
I don't know. I went back and I looked on the film today, and it is the same shirt.
It's the very same shirt.
It's not the exact same shirt.
Oh,
The
okay.
patchwork is different. But there are two things here. So there's the spiritual experience.
Right.
Then there's just the interesting sort of history of this shirt. So I'll cut to the history, and then I'll go back to the spiritual experience, and then I'll be quiet here. the history is that this is from Indian Imports of Rhode Island, which I Googled today, and there's actually a little bit of a history of this store online. And it was a hippie shop
Sorry,
that was
Indian Imports of Rhode Island.
Indian. So the tag is Indian Imports of Rhode Island. And this was clearly, I lived in India and I know what these things look like. And this was definitely made in India for this store that was run by an Indian family in Rhode Island. And they, I guess, were very popular in the 70s because they opened up stores. They even had one here in New York City on Fifth Avenue for a while. And they sold hippie clothes. So my guy in the movie most definitely purchased his shirt from that same store. If not that one, maybe they had one in San Francisco. So the mystery was solved in the sense that it is the same shirt. It's not the exact same shirt. It's not the specific same shirt, but we clearly shop at the same place. And it makes me think that because I saw that when I was at this very tender age, that it permeated my subconscious and it informed my tastes around psychedelia. And when I saw this and I bought it, I might have been acting on those very early impressions that movie made on me as a burgeoning psychonaut in high school.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It makes you wonder because if you think of like, to take it in a whole different direction, the government experiments with LSD and MK Ultra and stuff, trying to be suggestive with drugs and stuff like that, and this is an example of that.
Yeah.
Weird way to go, I know, but
the spiritual religious part of this, when this woman said "fink," I thought to myself, "Boy, I'm a fink. Boy, am I a big fat fink." Here I am, thinking, despite all my Buddhist deconstructionism, despite all this sort of loss of ego crap that, I talk about and try to practice, like here I am thinking that the universe revolves around me, and I've got this like powerful narrative of this shirt and how it's destiny that like I should own this particular shirt that this guy in this very influential movie had. And it was, what I realized was so much of my thinking and my aspirations were just about me and really a kind of reification of my identity as being special, intrinsically special, inherently special in this way that from a Buddhist perspective could never really exist.
Right. But I think it's a very human thing. I think we all have that to some degree.
It is. So the spiritual experience was not this sort of transcendental ego loss. It was this moment of Zen, or this moment of epiphany into my own ego grasping, and how I clung to this narrative of the story of this shirt and so wanted it to be the same shirt and to sort of validate all of my mystical sort of inclinations and desires. And then when I had this sort of thought that I'm the thing, then I realized, wow, this is the spiritual experience. Like I am the think, and I am realizing my own self-clinging. But then I had the thought, well, am I just doing it again? Am I doing it right now?
Yeah, I always go through that same kind of thing. It's like, oh, look at that. I notice how I have an ego. Oh, shit, I'm doing it again.
Well, here I am telling the legend of Fink, right?
Right.
And it's, I'm glorifying...
Made forever live on.
I'm glorifying this thing. I'm glorifying the fact that I realized I was clinging and glorifying this other narrative. And at the end of the day, like you just... I guess what made it authentic and meaningful was the way in which the universe seemed to grind me down into nothing, but then allowed me to also rise up from that nothingness into something more authentic, but not intrinsic, not egocentric, not demanding the world to revolve around me.
Right. But that's a great story. I'm
something
glad
more
you shared
interconnected. And I guess that's where the history comes in too. And maybe I shouldn't just dismiss it as not part of the spiritual experience. But looking into the history of this shirt, I realize that it's not about destiny. It's not about like this cloak being, just for me or sacred. It's about being a part of something and being interconnected and sharing and inhabiting the same clothes as these other people who I consider to be interesting.
Yeah, no, that's if Levi happens to be listening to this, send me an email. I'll put you in touch.
That was pretty cool. I mean, like, the whole notion of peeling the layers of the onion, shedding layers. I mean, you literally last night during this experience shed layers, which brought you to this self-discussion about the nature of essence. I mean, back to Enneagram and back to ego death and what have you. And I mean, you literally took the shirt
Yeah.
off your body and had that discussion with yourself and with some other people.
And the great thing about New York is that it didn't take me long to find somebody who was willing to dig into the back.
Help you shed layers.
Yes. I mean, we sat down I sat down with this young couple and we talked for 30 minutes.
Really? That's
Yeah.
great.
Oh, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
You were tripping this whole time, correct?
Yes. I
Okay,
was.
just
Yeah,
double checking.
I had taken a small dose of psilocybin, and I guess I'm still a little coy about saying these things.
No,
but-
this is completely fictional. It's a story, and it didn't really happen.
Yeah.
But I was doing a little bit of the hippie flip last night, which I don't forget which is which, the hippie flip or the candy flip, but it was a mix of psilocybin and MDMA. So
Oh wow,
yeah,
never mixed. What was that like? Psilocybin and MDMA.
yeah, it's great. It's kind of wonderful in that the MDMA opens your heart and the psilocybin takes you on a journey.
Interesting.
So it's a famous combination.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's the hippie flip.
The hippie flip. I've never
Yeah.
heard that before.
I think candy flipping is when you do LSD in conjunction with MDMA. But
That seems hardcore.
Todd and I have actually talked about this in the context of, with the idea behind hippie flipping. Like it's not just, a good time or a recipe for a spiritual experience. Like you could think about it just in terms of the MDMA being a kind of vehicle for easing into the psilocybin trip, which can be, if you're doing it can always be challenging, and particularly I think when you're doing it for the first time and you don't know what to expect, can be intimidating, and doing the MDMA in conjunction right before could ease that transition and make it a little bit less, a little friendlier. Make it
Interesting. I've never really had an issue with not that I've done a ton, but I've done psilocybin a couple of times, and I've never, of course, the first time you do it, it's scary. You don't know what's going to happen, but it's never been quite an issue where once it comes on, I'm like, oh shit. So I don't really understand the idea of easing into it.
right.
Although I could see why a lot of people would want it. Also, in terms of hippie flip, doing it for spirituality or doing it for fun, I think with most of these things, save like DMT, obviously you're not going to be doing it for fun because of what it does to you. But with most of these drugs, LSD, psilocybin, ecstasy, people can do it in different ways. Some people are doing it for growth, for spiritual growth, or for any other kind of growth, psychological if you prefer. But there's also people doing it just for fun. And I do think it's a very different experience, and depending on what you go into it with.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. So we can bring this back to consciousness hacking very easily.
absolutely.
So part of how we spin consciousness hacking in New York is we have these different modalities that we use for a very specific purpose, and that is the alleviation of suffering. So in many ways, it has a Mahayana kind of flair to it, and that is how Mikey sort of frames it. He's very good about focusing on the alleviation of suffering, whatever that means, for you, if that means addressing your own issues and then taking it to others. But what we do in New York City is we recognize 3 or more different modalities. We have technology, we have psychedelics, and we have contemplation. And we see these as sort of, 3 spheres overlapping, and consciousness hacking being at that point of convergence between these 3 spheres. So in the same way, like somebody might do yoga just to have a tight ass, somebody can hippie flip just to have a good time.
Of course.
What makes it consciousness hacking is the motivation. Are you doing it?
Of course.
Are you going into this with some sort of sense of hacking into your habitually destructive tendencies of behavior, of mind, Are you going to use this? How are you going to use this experience? How are you going to exploit it? Is it going to be effective spiritually, or is it just going to get you off? And I don't mean to dismiss the getting off thing, and I don't mean to dismiss the doing yoga for a tight butt. In fact, I would argue that even if you don't have this motivation, you can acquire it along the way.
Of course.
Just like somebody can go to a yoga class with the desire just to have a tight ass and come out devout Hindu.
And I think also, I think just to jump in, I think I don't think any motivation is right or wrong or good or bad.
Yeah,
I think I think obviously
I wasn't implying that either.
No, I'm not saying you were.
Yeah.
But I think again, I think that's the duality problem, I guess, conundrum that we face, right? I think, at least for me, the more I've been thinking about this, it's, are you aware? Are you conscious of what your motivation is? Are you conscious of where you are at that point in time? Right? I think a lot of people do come to yoga maybe initially because they do want a tight butt, and I think if you're actually aware of that motivation, that's like the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
Just having
That's a fair
that
point.
self-consciousness that like, that's what I want right now. I think most people, go through their lives not having any real idea of what it is they want because they're so conditioned to want what everyone else to want
That's
what
a really
their
good point.
family
Really,
wants or their
yeah.
parents want or their culture wants. But to be able to step outside that cultural conditioning and be like, this is what I want. That, to me, like, that sincerity is what I find most attractive in people. Is just this is where I am.
I hear that, and that's a difficult thing to do, and you have to constantly do it. Because every single time, I mean, not necessarily in the case of a tight butt, but even in the case of a tight butt, you have to constantly say, all right, this is what I want. I got to go do it.
Yeah.
A question for you, Todd, actually, because I assume you're the technology part of the consciousness hacking. Is that correct? I'm sure everything mixes together.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like
I err towards the psychedelics, and Todd errs towards the
I would have thought you erred toward the consciousness meditation, that sort of
too.
stuff.
That too.
Okay, yeah. So I'm curious. In let's call them hippie for lack of a better term, in hippie communities, I really don't like that term. In communities about consciousness that or let's call it new agey or whatever.
How about countercultural?
Let's call it
open-minded.
I'm not even entirely sure it's counterculture anymore.
Okay, yeah.
But that being said, in these sort of communities, what you tend to see is a lot of people, or what I tend to see, I should say, is a lot of people who are, to some degree, not in reality, but in idealism, averse to using technology, trying to be more together with the earth and whatever. So what is technology for consciousness hacking, and how does it work in that sense with people who are usually very theoretically, not practically, anti-technology?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it all depends how you define technology. And just to, invoke some air quotes here, I put quotation marks around technology, right? I mean, yoga is a technology. I mean, yeah, we're using microphones right now and, hardware and software. And that, I guess, conventionally, it's the software and the hardware, it's the ones and the zeros that we consider to be technology. But technology to me, and Chris can obviously define it in his own way, but I think we do share a common definition. Technology, it's a methodology, it's a modality, it's a process that one uses to transform something. Right?
I think that's fair.
You write software to transform and create some sort of application. So I think, again, with technology, the technologies, again, to put, I guess, technology in more of a Silicon Valley type of context, the types of technologies that we've showcased at our meetups are, everything from, Oculus Rift headsets. I guess the one example of that was
So
one of
cool.
our, I think it was a pretty popular meetup of ours. We did it. So we host these meetups, I guess all over the city, but we've hosted them at Eddie Stern's Ashtanga Yoga Studio out here in Brooklyn. We've hosted them at ThoughtWorks in Midtown. We've hosted them at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program, and also at Ken Jordan's Alchemist Kitchen, which is this great bastion of, I don't know how we should describe the Alchemist Kitchen, but in the East Village. And so at this meetup in the East Village, I think what we like to do with a lot of our meetups is we like to bring together an eclectic mix of speakers, bring together a panel that are all fascinated by a similar topic, but approach it in in a different way, using a different modality. So Mikey Siegel actually had recommended we invite this one game designer, and his name is skipping my mind right now.
Robin Arnott.
Robin Arnott, yeah. And so Robin's story, he's a very well-known game designer, and his story is that he was a Burning Man, and he dropped acid, and kind of came to this revelation, if you will, that he wanted to build a game using virtual reality, but the game would be built such that the images, the kind of these meditative psychedelic images that you see in the VR space result from biofeedback. So you actually talk into a microphone, and the images kind of interact with your voice, and the images are designed to be very meditative and seductively, I guess, calming, if you will. So I guess our idea behind the meetup was, okay, well, let's bring Robin together. And since Robin was so inspired by this LSD trip and technology, using technology as a means of creating this meditative space, let's bring together a Buddhist psychotherapist, Miles Neal, as well as a psychedelic researcher, also a psychologist, Neil Goldsmith. So it was a pretty cool event. So we did this at the Alchemist Kitchen, and these three different gentlemen, spoke about, Buddhist psychotherapy, game design, and then psychedelics and meditation. So the events are really. We have a really cool crew. We have about 100 people come. I'd say.
Yeah, I should come to more of them because the one that I've been to was great.
And it's a very. I've been going to meetups for I feel like ever since Meetup was created, and all these different events, and I think we all go to a lot of events in the city, and it's a really eclectic mix of people. And we always do a panel at the end of the event, and we have to kick people out. I mean, our events are 3 hours, and people just want to keep asking questions. So it's a very, I think overall, yeah, you've got your software and hardware, and I know I've gone off on a tangent. You asked me about technology, but you've got everyone from software and hardware engineers to yogis and monks and meditators and students from Chris's class, and people are just really, really committed to wanting to expand their horizons.
Hack their consciousness.
Yeah, hack their consciousness. Yeah. That's the expression I probably should be using. We had Ayelet Waldman come speak at the Alchemist Kitchen 2 months ago, and she may be known to your listeners. She's actually I probably shouldn't describe her right away this way, but she's the wife of the very well-known literary novelist Michael Chabon. She's a literary novelist in her own right. She also went to Harvard Law School with Barack Obama. I think she was a year behind him or a year ahead of him. She's public defender, but she wrote a book about LSD microdosing, and
she's the one. It's about. She's a psychologist.
No, she's a public defender. She's a lawyer, but she's also a novelist in her own right. And so I think I think
I've heard of her. She had anxiety or something like that, or depression, and she started microdosing.
Yeah.
I've heard of the book. I haven't read it.
Yeah. She got profiled in the New York Times and the New Yorker, all over the place. And she's a fascinating character and has just a great personality. And I think she, to kind of boil it down, she came to this point in time where she just, she realized that she was angry. She realized that she was, overreactive and just not a very, very happy person. And, lives in Berkeley, and, people can, go online and listen to her part of a bunch of different podcasts. But yes, she sought out. Yeah, I think she read, what was his name? Who's the guy?
Fadiman.
She read James Fadiman's book about microdosing, and she thought it'd be easy to come into contact with some LSD, and found it very hard in Berkeley. Even though she knew all the, I guess, the VIPs in Berkeley. And one day, after she'd been asking around and couldn't find any, I guess a dropper of LSD showed up at her doorstep. And so she did she microdosed LSD.
A dropper with the label "Drink Me."
Yes.
Yeah. in an envelope.
That's not suspicious
with a
at all.
return address to Lewis Carroll.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh wow.
But but she was blown away. She did it for 30 days, and she said, my whole outlook, character. And I don't think she'd ever done any drugs before.
No, she was not a psychonaut. And I would argue, maybe she is now. I don't know. Depends on your definition of psychonaut. But what she was a very experienced prescription drug user. Like, she had been prescribed all manner of antidepressant, and none of it had worked.
Right.
And so this was not an experiment in the abstract. This was a decision she made to address some very real problems that she was having.
Well, I would certainly say if a drug like LSD is less risky than risky than most of those antidepressants, if not all of them, and is going to give you a better long-term solution, I can't see why not, other than obviously all the stigma that's attached to it.
And those guys with badges and guns who don't...
yes, and those.
Who can be bad for your health, too.
Yeah, that's a different side effect.
I should add, actually, just
Yeah, please do.
from a Buddhist perspective, these different modalities. There's this idea which is shared with Theravada and Mahayana, but has a particularly privileged place within the Mahayana tradition, and this is this idea of skill and means, upaya. And the idea is based on a philosophy that rejects the intrinsic nature of all things. In other words, value is something that we ascribe based on context, and from a Buddhist perspective, that context is largely defined by karma. So what that allows for is a kind of openness to many different modalities being potentially spiritually effective depending on the context, right?
Right.
So it may, Tantra is based on this. Lots of people have misunderstandings about Tantra, but the basic idea behind Buddhist Tantra is that you're embracing something that would, under normal circumstances, be an obstacle, but in this particular context can actually expedite your spiritual progress. And so the idea of skillful means is, you could reduce it to like by any means necessary, and that means being tailor fit to the individual. So if technology is something that you are versed in and you see the world through the veil of technology, then it makes sense that your path to enlightenment is also going to be defined in terms of technology. But that could change depending on the context and the person. Maybe if you're too technological, then you might actually, your path might be to abandon technology, because that would be effective for you in that context. But that's the tricky thing about skillful means,
that's fair.
is you don't really know, and the guru is there to sort of help facilitate this, but you can see how that would also be problematic, because it requires a lot of faith and it requires trust, and the guru disciple relationship, particularly in the West, is fraught.
Oh, I'm always very, very hesitant of anybody who calls themselves a guru or a master or anything like that, especially the ones who want you to stay there forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm sure there are plenty of gurus and masters who really are what they claim to be. And even some of the ones that are phonies are real masters, but they haven't gotten past the point of letting people go, teaching people to be on their own.
Yeah.
As a thought experiment, psychedelics as a path of enlightenment, or potentially as something that's going to make you think that you're enlightened, meaning an immediate window toward enlightenment that doesn't really help you necessarily in the long run to be enlightened. What do you think about that? Because I always tend to think about these things. When I think of psychedelics, I think of sort of a window to enlightenment, so you can understand what it's like to be there, so you know where to move to, as opposed to a drug that'll get you there on its own. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that psychedelics can be used for spiritual ends. The way that this has been handled within Buddhist discourse, there aren't many books written on Buddhism and psychedelics, and the one that everybody regards and as authoritative is Zigzag Zen, which Alan Badiner edited, and it includes essays from a whole host of characters. Terence McKenna's in there. Eric Davis wrote a lovely essay in there.
The founder of Esalen wrote a piece. Yeah. The founder of the Whole Earth Catalog. Yeah. And wasn't Zigzag Zen, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't that a collection of essays that was written for Tricycle Magazine back in the 90s?
Yeah, okay. So it came about because of this Tricycle special edition on Buddhism and psychedelics, which was very popular and included many of the essays that eventually went into the book. For me personally, that book was really important because when I became a Buddhist, I was conflicted about my psychedelic use, and I abandoned psychedelics for many years, particularly when I was living in a monastery. But Zigzag Zen was important because it addressed this issue that nobody was sort of talking about. And one of the things that came out of that publication was this sort of way of talking about Buddhism and psychedelics. And Eric Davis handles this very well in his book, and Doug Ostow wrote a whole new book. This is the other publication on Buddhism and psychedelics that's out there that just came out a year ago from Columbia Press. And it's called Altered States, Buddhism and Psychedelics. And so these different narratives that come out of this are the idea of psychedelics being a door opener, giving you a sort of taste of enlightenment, and then you got to do like the hard work of actually achieving it without the aid of an intoxicant or a substance.
Right.
That's the sort of door open idea that, it's a door opener. It leads you to this thing, but it's not going to take you there because drugs don't do that. Like you have to do that.
Right.
It's very sort of, Protestant work ethic kind of idea. Like you have to, bleed and sweat in order to attain your enlightenment. You can't just pop a pill.
Right.
And then there's another sort of idea that maybe psychedelics are not just a door opener, but maybe there's a way in which they can actually have a more dynamic relationship to your spiritual practice and can intertwine them, can combine them. You can derive lessons from the plant or the substance, and then you can derive lessons from your meditation practice, and then maybe you can do a little bit of both. And that's really interesting to me, and how to do that. In terms of, I think, what you asked in terms of enlightenment and this sort of linear way of thinking, I think it's problematic to be, on the one hand, if you're a practitioner, you're practicing, you have goals, you have aims. You're not going to make progress if you're not practicing every day, if you're not keeping track of where you're at with your practice. But I think clinging to this sort of linear evolution of your spiritual life is a problem. And
that's fair, yeah. And
in the same way that, this shirt thing was a lesson, right? Like I was clinging to this sort of very strong narrative of this shirt and its relationship to me, and it was all about me. And I think when you think of enlightenment in this sort of linear way, it can also be an ego trip, and it's all about my enlightenment and
that's fair, yeah. That's
and
a good
me.
point.
And when you look at spiritual biographies, which are these stories written about enlightened masters, they always kind of say the same thing. Like when they eventually did get enlightened, it wasn't at all what they expected, and it kind of snuck up on them from behind. So I guess the long and the short of it is I don't think it's spiritually salubrious to talk about enlightenment in this very linear way. Like you want to be doing your practice every day and you want to be productive, but at the same time you need to be skeptical of your ideas of
I think that's a very fair point that I probably needed to hear.
Yeah.
How would you, it's funny, I was having a vigorous discussion. Someone actually at one of our meetups, whose name I'm actually not going to mention on the podcast, asked me, he asked me what enlightenment was. And I actually said, sir, I don't actually know what it means. And he actually was kind of aghast that I felt, my impression was that he was aghast that I was co-curating a consciousness hacking meetup, and I didn't have a very, very firm definition of what enlightenment was. And I'm like, dude, I don't actually really know what it means. To be honest, actually, one of the reasons that I'm involved in this meetup is because I'm actually trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's the majority
of
us.
I want to expose myself to a lot of different types of people. But I don't know, I wanted to, we've been talking, you mentioned gurus and as I was saying, I was studying the Gita with a bunch of Hare Krishna monks, and one of my good friends who's not a monk any longer, he is a guru, and his guru is Radhanath Swami, who's a bhakti yogi who lives in India now. And I remember when I first met Radhanath Swami, he was wearing his, I guess, no, they weren't, the Hindus don't wear, it's not saffron, it's the kind of the orange color.
Right.
And I think being a Westerner, I certainly was a little bit
taken aback.
But coming back, I wanted to ask you actually how you define enlightenment, because the more I've been thinking about it actually just recently, because I've been actually talking about going down to Peru to do ayahuasca. I've actually never done. I've done MDMA once, and actually didn't feel the self-love that I was so desiring. But the more I've been thinking about enlightenment, I think to me, the people that I consider to be quote unquote enlightened, the two qualities that I guess I associate with enlightenment are humility and vulnerability. And I remember when I was doing my TEDx conference, I was really seeking out people that I thought that really embodied humility and vulnerability. And I don't think you can fake those two qualities. So I don't know. I wanted to ask you. I don't think I've ever asked you what you thought enlightenment was, and Saul asked you about this question. How do you think about enlightenment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like there's a recent article in Lion's Roar magazine. I think I saw the title, and it suggested that they were taking up this very same topic. I mean, there are definitions in Buddhism, and they involve ideas like omniscience. In Buddhism, the end game of enlightenment is not to become omnipotent. That's not possible. But what is possible is omniscience. People think, well, great, it can be omniscient and know all the lottery numbers and win the lottery or something. Like omniscience here means...
You mean omniscience while in the mortal body? No, I know what you mean by the word, but in the mortal body?
Well, see now you're going to... This is the problem with talking about enlightenment, is enlightenment is an idea that stands outside of our dualistic notions of the world. So by definition, it is not definable. Mm-hmm. If you look at Hindu books like the Upanishads, they'll say things like neti neti, is not. They're using double negatives to arrive at some sort of positive, which is just another way of saying what we're talking about here cannot, by definition, be construed in dualistic terms, and therefore is inconceivable.
That's like the beginning of the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
Yes. The words that can be spoken are not the true words.
Yeah.
But
there's no way to describe
exactly
it.
right.
Yeah.
But I don't want to. I'm not trying to pin you down here, but
Pin him down.
as you go through your daily life, honestly,
that's what I'm getting at.
Okay, because I'm genuinely, again, I think people do throw, and I appreciate, from a scholarly perspective, it's language maybe. You can't use language in our dualistic world to define what enlightenment was or is. Keep on going. Yeah.
So this question comes up in my teaching, and we'll sort of go through the sort of formal Buddhist ideas about enlightenment. But then it's like, well, what does it really mean to you in your sort of day-to-day thinking? And first off, I think in my day-to-day thinking, I try not to think about it in that linear way that involves an ego clinging to a very linear end game or goal. But when I think about it, when I conceptualize it, what do I, because you have to, if you want something, you have to know what it is you want. Mm-hmm. You're talking about. That's a very good question. Most people can't answer what they really want. And so if you're going to want enlightenment, even if it is inconceivable, you have to have something conceivable that you can identify as that's what I want. And I think for me, it comes down to not hurting people. Mm-hmm. Because it's one thing, to not hurt people in the obvious sense. Mm-hmm. And it's another thing to be able to navigate the world in ways in which you're not hurting them in the more subtle ways that we hurt each other every minute, just in this conversation here, I may have said something hurtful to one of you or somebody listening. Maybe I said, I know I did before we even started talking.
I could take it out if you want, if it's really bad.
No.
Okay.
But if you're really sensitive, and I think this is something that both psychedelics and Buddhism sort of attune you to, is this being extremely sensitive to the ways in which we inadvertently hurt each other every minute. If you go with a Jain perspective, the Jain religion, they take this idea very seriously, and it to the point where breathing itself is this sort of harmful thing.
Breathing itself? I didn't know that about Jainism.
This is the most extreme orthodox version of Jainism. They say that everything that you're doing is contributing to the sort of mass suffering, and Buddhists believe that too. They just have a different metaphysics around karma that changes things. For Jains, karma is actually a physical thing. Yeah. And so the way they manage karma has very obvious physical aspects. An Orthodox Jain will not wear clothes. They won't walk on grass for fear of damaging microorganisms. They'll wear a mask, like a surgical mask, so they don't inhale microorganisms. So this is very sort of, and just eating and breathing is contributing to the suffering of others. But what I'm talking about is more just sort of social, psychological suffering that I can feel. You know, it's not abstract. It's like when I sensitize myself, which oftentimes happens. I'll give you an example. Like, so last night, and this is how psychedelics for me are very spiritually efficacious. I just had this thought when I was thinking that my wife, 5 days previous, in passing, made a comment about this ring. Our engagement ring was a ring I got out of one of those dime store like vending machines.
I'm a fan.
The plastic.
Yeah,
legs.
the plastic. I just did it and proposed, and my lady wanted even though she's a practical person and she wanted her diamond. Make it. She wanted her diamond,
She made this note known 5 days ago.
Well,
Oh.
no. She just in general, after we got engaged and I did the dime store thing, like at a certain point, like she made it known that she wanted a diamond, and I wanted to give her a diamond, and that's part of how we roll as Americans. So I got to respect the frameworks in which we exist, and I wanted to get her a diamond, but being an adjunct professor, I don't make that much money, and it just so happened there was this great diamond in my mom's jewelry box from her previous marriage, which is not, it's not nice to use a diamond from a failed marriage.
I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, so I gave it to her, and she liked it. I think she will love it once she's made it her own.
When did you give it to her? Just 5 days ago?
No.
Oh.
This was years ago.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So 5 days ago,
Oh.
5 days ago, she made this remark to me in passing that she really wanted to do something with the stone. She wanted to reset it. We have a woman who designed our wedding rings, who's this lovely artist in Hudson, New York. And she's like, maybe we can go see her and have her do something really artistic. And all I heard when she said this was, money. That's going to cost money, and we don't have a lot of money, so I don't want to do that. And you should just be happy with the diamond I gave you. But last night, when I'm doing my sort of spiritual psychedelic thing, I revisited that moment, and suddenly I heard a different side of the story. I heard her side of the story, which was, I love you and I love our relationship, and I want to take this thing that society sort of has conditioned us to look upon as a symbol of our love, and I want to make it our own. I want to really infuse it with this very special thing that we've created. And I don't want it to just be a diamond in quotes or a status symbol. I want it to be unique. I want it to be authentic.
Right.
And I didn't hear that at the time. I heard that last night, and it was like in stereo to me. So what I'm getting is that the psychedelics helped me see how I hurt her in this very subtle way. Like, I shut her down. I said, when she brought up this idea of tweaking it, I was kind of like, fine. When we get more money, we'll do that. I didn't hear her. You know what I mean? I didn't empathize with her. I didn't make the leap into her subjectivity. All I heard was my own sort of rejection because of financial stress. Last night I heard her in stereo, and I didn't have to do this, but I said, look, remember 5 days ago when you brought this up? She's like, yeah, I kind of remember that. I'm like, I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I totally understand what your impulse was, and I want you to know that I respect it, and I'm sorry for that. And I didn't realize at the time I was hurting her, and I don't even know if she realized it, but I was.
Interesting. So on that subject, obviously it's slightly different when it's your wife or your family, or maybe it isn't. But at what point is trying to not hurt anybody infringing upon being able to live your life as you see? I mean, Jainism is actually a very good example of that, where, like the extreme Jainism where they barely can do anything.
Right. It's true.
See,
I don't mean that in an insulting way, speaking of hurting people.
It's impractical, and that's why most Jains are not orthodox.
Right.
Most Jains are actually very astute business people who wear clothes.
Yeah, I was just going to back up, and we talk about ego and narcissism, and like I think that The reason that I initially wanted to do MDMA is because I'd read all these different stories of people actually doing MDMA and realizing for the first time that they love themselves. And I think in common discourse, when you talk about loving yourself, I think people very, very quickly associate, why are you even talking about loving yourself? I think it's very easily kind of misconstrued as you are a narcissist. But I guess I bring up loving yourself. I actually heard a really great podcast. People may know about this guy James Altucher, who is a great podcast, and he interviewed this guy Kamal Ravikant, who had actually just come back. I've never done it before. Do you guys have any friends that have done that walk across Spain? It's like
No.
it's like a 500-mile trek. I guess it's a spiritual voyage, and he went on it.
Oh, cool.
It's called like El Camino Royale. I'm not sure what it's called, but anyway, Altucher interviewed Kamal Ravikant, and because he had just written a book, I think, and the whole book was about kind of loving yourself. And I just bring this up because I think oftentimes I find myself inadvertently hurting other people. I think, and maybe this is my kind of recent revelation, because I don't always love myself. You know, if you don't eat well, if you don't treat yourself, if you don't treat yourself well, how can you honestly, as you live your life, treat other people well? It may be simple-minded, but I think oftentimes we don't treat ourselves well, and if you don't treat yourself well, if you don't love yourself, how can you ask yourself to love other people?
I think there's two modes of that. I think there's the mode of, if I don't treat myself well, how can I treat other people well? But there's also the opposite of, I only treat other people well, and not only do I treat myself badly, but I spite myself in order to treat other people well. So I think you can have both.
Yeah.
But,
Well, that's the tricky thing about ego grasping, is that it can masquerade as self deprecation.
Mm-hmm.
It can, you being selfless and all, these heroic sort of deeds that you do for others can itself be a head trip, and not actually pure altruism, even though it looks.
Yeah, very often altruism is, in fact, egotistical.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because we all know what false humility is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
To me, false humility is incredibly off-putting, and you can see it from a mile away, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you know if someone is being genuine or if
For sure.
someone is just exhibiting false humility.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's generally very obvious. And I think there's, again, levels of that. I think everybody has some level of false humility on a daily basis to some degree. But there's some false humble people which are very clearly not humble.
Yeah.
Oh, I will say this, too, about enlightenment. One of the tricky things that comes up in Buddhist conversations about enlightenment is they say things like, well, if Buddha's omniscient and Buddha doesn't experience suffering, then how, Buddha must know my mind, right? Because that's the whole sort of thing about omniscience, is it's an attractive goal, because once you have omniscience, you can help other people that much better, because you can see the world through their eyes. You can know their mind. So one of the things that comes up is, well, if Buddha can know my mind, then he must know my suffering and experience it vicariously. So what's up with that? It's like a philosophical point, If
Right.
he's transcended suffering, then how can he experience my suffering vicariously?
But is that the point, that he's actually transcended suffering, or that he's recognized that suffering is a thing and how to basically detach himself from that suffering?
Yeah, it's more along the lines of what you're saying. Like
Yeah.
he sees my suffering and has only compassion for me. So it's like, watching a child have a tantrum where you're not caught up in their tantrum, but
Right.
but you just see it for what it is, and you have compassion. So I had, again, yesterday, I'm still reeling from my trip yesterday. One of the insights I had was my landlord, right, who I don't get along with. I have this sort of thing, like every time we invite him to fix something, he ends up doing more damage than good. And so yesterday we invited him into the house, literally yesterday, and to fix a window. And what he discovered, and I was afraid he would discover this, was that we have a squirrel's nest underneath our air conditioner next to the damaged window. And so I got this note from him saying, yeah, we found this squirrel's nest, and would you believe it? Like, there were babies in there, and Guillermo and I, that's his handyman, it took us forever to get the nest out, and once we got it out, I had to chase the mother off, and he's just describing this Holocaust that went on in our house while I was at work, and that was what I didn't want to happen. I didn't want those squirrels to be injured, and I was afraid that he might do that. So he's describing this, and my first reaction is, I hate that guy. You know, what an asshole for doing this, and how can he go on and on and on and brag about like chasing off the mother? And you know, he went into details about how the mother kept looking back at the nest, and he couldn't believe that the mother was that attached to the nest. And you're just like, dude, you just broke up a family.
Yeah.
So I'm really hating on this guy, you know. And then I had this moment of compassion where it was almost because he was so blasé and about this, you know, terrible thing he did, so matter of fact about it, that I had this moment like, wow, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get that like his assholeness may be directly related to these kinds of things that he does all the time without realizing that they're harmful, that he's doing harm. So in other words, you don't have to be a Buddhist to see this. What I'm arguing is that on some subconscious level, he knows that even though they're squirrels, they're sentient beings, and he is inflicting harm on them, and that's taking a toll. That is contributing to his assholeness to people in his life.
I can't fully blame him, only because culturally that's not something that's because we're in a humanist age and humans are the most important thing as far as humanism goes. I can't really blame him because culturally we don't enforce that as a thing.
Right.
It's like, oh, whatever, they're animals, they'll be fine.
Right.
Which I don't necessarily agree with.
Right.
But it's hard to. I'm not saying he's not an asshole. I don't know him at all. But I'm saying it's hard to call somebody an asshole for something like that when they don't know any better.
Right. Right. And I'm not saying he's blameworthy. And that's the compassion part, is that it's more like, I understand where he's coming from. I understand like the dynamic in terms of where his assholeness comes from.
Right.
And I have compassion for him. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay.
So rather than hating on him and saying, God, my landlord is the epitome of evil, and he did this terrible thing, and I just don't like him, I'm like, I have this sort of real sort of sense like a father looking at their child and saying, don't you see how you're hurting yourself?
Yeah.
And it's so sad.
That's fair. Yeah.
And to your point, though, like, yeah, culture tells us a lot of stuff, and most of the time it's ass backwards. And and I think if you know, this is a philosophical debate, but I think if you are doing meditation, if you are using psychedelics in spiritual ways, if you're using technology in spiritual ways, and again, this is contentious, I do think that we have moral intuitions or moral impulses that we are born with, that are wired into the fabric and constitution of the human species.
I think that's fair, yeah.
And I think things like meditation essentially turn up the volume on those intuitions. So if you are sensitizing yourself, you don't need to be told not to harm sentient beings. Like you'll feel it.
Right. Yeah, I guess just it's odd because meditation being sort of a self-involved activity, like going more into the self, does, I feel, make you more aware of your surroundings and how other people are the same as you, and other animals to some degree are the same. So yeah, I mean that's a good point. I think when people become more mindful, whether it's through meditation or other means such as psychedelics or technology, these kind of things definitely come up. So that's a good point. I don't want to keep you guys. I don't know if you guys have to leave. I'm happy to keep going because I'm having fun. But if you guys have some time by which you need to leave, I want to make sure I don't keep you.
I'm okay on time. I have to pick my kids up from school. That's the only thing.
Yeah, let's have a little more fun.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right, so you still haven't quite defined what you mean by enlightenment, common enlightenment. Let's not call it. Well, I don't even know what I mean by that. Is there a definition that you have? And Todd, is there a definition that I know you're saying you don't have, but is there?
Well, I do. I mean,
let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I would love to have a guru. I'm actually very and
you're shopping for a guru.
Yeah, but actually, so I think for me, enlightenment, it's really for me, it's a process of really I think it begins with trying to get to know yourself, hurt yourself less, and I think the less you hurt yourself, the more you love yourself. And again, whether it be MDMA or different psychedelics or meditation, I think once you become aware of the fact that you do things each and every day that hurt you, just that simple awareness, I think, allows you to do less harm in the world. And, back to your superintendent. His dharma, or whatever word you want to use, is to keep you safe, right? It's to oversee the building, and he probably worried about these animals potentially affecting the safety and security of you and your family. Obviously, you saw it from a different angle, but he was just very focused on the building and you guys. But yeah, I'm actually kind of excited. As I was saying at the outset, I've did a lot of yoga for a number of years, and I've been kind of hemming and hawing about getting back into yoga. And I think I'm going to be in Montreal next week visiting my business partner. When I come back, I'm actually going to start doing Ashtanga with Eddie Stern.
Oh, are you?
Which I'm really excited about. Yeah, I think for me, Eddie Stern for me, and Chris and I have spoken about this. He's from Brooklyn, went to India in the mid '80s. Probably one of the most prominent yoga teachers in the world. Practices, teaches Ashtanga, but you never see him on the cover of Yoga Journal or cover of magazines.
I like that. That's the kind of guru that I'm talking about.
Yeah, and for me, he is just he's one of those people. At least in terms of my interactions with him, he just exudes humility and authenticity. Ashtanga for me, I've got no idea what to expect, but just the idea of going in every day, the sincerity of the practice, recognizing, okay, I know I've done a little bit of yoga, but I'm going to be starting, from scratch. And I think for a long time, I worried about going into this environment. Chris's wife is a very accomplished Ashtanga teacher and wrote a great book about the history of yoga in America, which actually I just began to read for the first time.
Right?
Yeah. But just, kind of recognizing where you are. Like, I would love, you look at all these crazy poses, being able to do fourth series, and, I'm not there yet. So, but I'm kind of at a point now where I think Eddie, for me, will be a guru of sorts, and I'm just really excited that I'm going to commit myself to this new practice.
Yeah, and you do have to make that. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the lovely thing about Eddie's pedagogy is that it is very traditional. Although I think he's gotten a little looser in his old age. Old age, he's like 50 something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Not so
Older age.
Yeah. Older. But traditionally, and this was the case when I went to study with him a long time ago. You had to commit to 6 days a week, and he would give you the sequence in piecemeal, and you would pay a whole month up front. And I remember having the thought, like, am I getting my money's worth here? I'm not getting the full practice. I'm only doing one posture a week, and but that is you come to appreciate, I think, his style of teaching, and it is different from most other teachers.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably more similar to the traditional method of teaching.
Yeah.
It's like I've done 1 or 2 classes of yoga. I really haven't gotten very into it for no particular reason. But what I've done a little bit more of is Qigong, which, for those not familiar, is a Chinese posture-based breathing exercise, for lack of a better word. And I see the same thing starting to happen in Qigong, where you have people who've been studying Qigong for years, and they do unbelievable things with Qigong, but now you're getting people who are starting to get, like, certified Qigong and whatever, and they've practiced for a year tops and are teaching. And this is not to shit all over yoga teachers who are certified, because I'm sure some of them are great, but a certification in yoga hardly makes you a yogi. I mean, you would know. You studied you studied the Bhagavad Gita, where it talks about yoga and what yoga is. And actually, I'll let you define it, because it's been a while since I read the Bhagavad Gita. If you're able to define what the meaning of yoga is.
Well, again, I think it's I think it's pretty simple. I mean, it's a union. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, yoga is about isn't am I right in saying yoga is union?
So yuj, the verbal root in Sanskrit, means to connect.
Yeah.
And to it's like it's cognate with English words like yoke.
Right,
So you have you yoke an oxen. You're connecting the plow to the ox.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The traditional, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras define yoga as chittavritti nirodha, which is the sensations of the fluctuations or the disturbances or perversions of mind.
Right. And in the Bhagavad Gita, yoga, in terms of the exercise, is, I believe, not even mentioned at all, or maybe mentioned in passing, right? So people are, not that it matters what word they use, obviously. I'm more of a bit of a Taoist with the whole usage of words. I don't really care that much about what words you use. But the idea of people doing yoga, which has become like going to the gym, seems very different from the purpose of yoga to begin with. And there's, I think, I wouldn't say few and far between because I'm not familiar with the community at all, but a lot of the people teaching yoga, like a lot of the people teaching Qigong, are not really teaching the principles of Qigong or the principles of yoga. What they're teaching is an exercise that'll, get your butt to look better.
Yeah.
Which, again, could in turn out to lead to the same place anyway.
But again, there are also different types of yoga, and again, I am in no way a yoga scholar, but there. So when we think of yoga, we think of hatha yoga. We think of the postures, and that's obviously one type of yoga. But back to we're different people, right? And
Sure.
so we have different personalities, different constructions, different essences,
Right.
whatever you want to call it. So when I mentioned studying the Bhagavad Gita with these Hare Krishna monks, they practice a form of yoga called Bhakti yoga. So Bhakti is all about devotion. So their form of yoga practice is not getting up every morning and doing physical postures, doing Ashtanga yoga, or I think what is called Raja yoga. They do Bhakti yoga. So their practice is devotional in the sense of they chant the Lord's name, and in the case of Bhakti, it's Krishna. And so again, there's Chris can say a lot more about this than I can, but having chanted the Hare Krishna mantra a number of times, you realize that there is something to be said for the I don't want to say transcendent, but
No,
I mean
it's good.
there is something. There's something about the nature of what a mantra can do to the mind. Chris, it really does slow the mind down. It calms the nervous system. It's really it's really a very, very pleasant, soothing way to kind of begin your day. And I think there's chanting mantras, there's doing physical postures, there's Jnana yoga, which is depending upon your personality type, it's Jnana yoga. From what I understand, it's approaching I guess life, if you will, from more of a scholarly knowledge perspective. It's studying the wisdom. So again, I think people need to understand, as I'm learning, that there are many different ways, there are many different approaches to yoga. You don't need to do the postures or chant Lord's name. You can be more of a scholar. So I think it for me comes back to really kind of understanding where you currently are, and you can practice all different types of yoga.
I'm going to start saying that. I did YouTube yoga today.
Yeah.
Went into a deep hole of random videos. So you're not just a Buddhist scholar. You've studied also Indian religion or religion.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna do Buddhism, you have to do Hinduism.
I guess that makes sense.
They're very historically they're intertwined. The way I teach it is that way. That if you look at it chronologically, Hinduism makes a splash with the Upanishads and all this talk about Atman, and then Buddha comes along and says no Atman, and that's very specific to the
I didn't know that Buddhism said no Atman.
Yeah, I think he's speaking directly to the Upanishads because they were the text at the time. And so he's really kind of pulling a Howard Stern and doing this sort of shock jock thing, all that talk about Atman, no Atman, ooh, it's got this sort of real power to it.
Yeah.
In other words, it wasn't just this sort of abstract philosophical principle. If the Upanishads hadn't been making such a stink about Atman, I don't think Buddha would have either.
Right.
He would have come out with a different way of saying it. He would have, and this is the nature of Buddhism, is that it's culturally parasitic. Like it latches on to the discourse or the zeitgeist, and it uses the vocabulary associated with that zeitgeist. It appropriates it for its own spiritual ends. So the Dalai Lama is very well known for his openness to science, and I think he has a genuine interest in science and technology.
Yeah,
but
he's like a PhD in different in philosophy. I think I just learned all this about him. I'm like, whoa, I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, if you read there's a very good book called The Universe in a Single Atom, where he sort of, it's one of these sort of intellectual memoirs where he sort of recounts all of his interactions with some very famous scientists and philosophers, and you get a real sense of his own very, authentic inclination towards scientific thinking. Add on top that there are ways in which I think Buddhism is compatible with the scientific method. But the level I want to add to that is that I think there is a kind of skillful means approach here where I believe the Dalai Lama is very conscious of the fact that science is the religion of the West and is appealing to it because it is the vocabulary of the day. Whether you're somebody like me who doesn't identify as a technologist, it informs me.
Right, of course.
It's part of me. I actually had this thought the other day that I might start my next lecture by asking people to remove their iPhones. It sort of started with this idea that, you don't want ringers going off and that sort of thing. But then what interested me was this idea of actually physically parting from it, because I think we've come to think of them as appendages, and we experience a little bit of pain when it's not within our reach.
That's a good point.
Pain and anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing because, and this is a big part of consciousness hacking that I haven't talked about, which is the pragmatic aspect, the philosophically pragmatic dimension, in that we focus a lot on visceral states. When I've talked about consciousness hacking publicly, one of the first things I do after introducing the idea is we do a consciousness hack, because I think the part of the philosophy is to have real experiences and not just be talking about them in the abstract. So to bring in an altered state and to use it in a particular way, that is consciousness hacking, and it's not just spinning wheels and talking in the abstract.
I think that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, so one thing we do actually, we've done on a number of occasions at our meetups, speaking about kind of exercises, because I think, we certainly have people that come and they talk at the meetups and they talk to the audience, and the audience asks questions of the speakers, and the audience, meets other people and speaks to each other. But we really do want to facilitate an experience so that when people walk out, something has shifted. There's been a noticeable change in the air. Yeah. And so I know what it was. Chris organized actually a consciousness hacking film festival at the Rubin Museum this past fall, and in coming up with these kind of 3 different themes or modalities of technology, meditation, and psychedelics, we screened 3 different films to fill each of these 3 different bins. And one of the films that we screened was Waking Life. And I'm not sure if have you seen Waking Life before?
I have not. No.
So it's a Richard Linklater film, and essentially the main character is Willie Wiggins, right, from Dazed and Confused. And so the premise of the film is Willie Wiggins meets all these different people. There are about 18 or so. I call them vignettes. He enters into these different discussions and he observes people having conversations. But the premise of the film is he's trying to figure out, okay, am I conscious or am I unconscious? Am I awake or am I dreaming? So one of the experiences that he has in one of the vignettes, what's it called again?
The Holy Moment.
The Holy Moment. And he observes this film, this poet and this film director having what's called a holy moment. And the holy moment is where the film director and the poet, they make eye contact. They just look into each other's eyes for a few minutes, and back to
I thought you said for a few months. I'm like, that's a little long.
Yeah, but we
don't put it past the yogis though.
That's fair. That's true.
And so what we've done at a number of our meetups since then, we've tried to orchestrate a holy moment. And so what we ask people to do, and it's a pretty cool experience, and I think people after the fact really enjoy it, is we ask people to turn to their neighbor, ideally someone they did not come with, and engage in this holy moment. And essentially the holy moment is just, you staring, for lack of a better word, into the other person's eyes for 5 minutes. And it's a really powerful experience. I know the first time I ever did it actually was at the Shambhala Center in Chelsea a number of years ago. And, you're really, once you kind of stop talking and just start looking and feeling, it's really amazing what can transpire. You start to feel things that you've never felt before. And you're like, wow, like this is actually what human connection is.
Yeah, there's a couple of years ago, there was an article that came out about how to fall in love with somebody. I don't know if you're aware of this. And it was a set of 20 questions and an exercise of staring at each other like eye to eye for a certain amount of time. Yeah. And it was exactly that. And people, I I didn't do it with anybody, and people have said that yes, it did amazing things. I don't know if it's long lasting, but it's the same kind of idea, that holy moment idea.
What's also what I actually I'm bummed I never actually went to MoMA to experience this, but the performance artist Marina Abramovich at MoMA, I think just a year. Did you see? Did you
I
guys see
didn't.
this?
I remember.
I know of it, and I actually just watched a documentary that they interviewed her
Yeah.
about it. It really, but go ahead, you explain it.
Yeah. So what documentary were you referring to?
It was.
I think I saw the same one.
It's like a Swedish one.
Not Insai, right?
Insai, that's
Yeah.
the one.
Yeah. We actually we Consciousness Hacking actually screened Insai at the Rubin
Oh,
Museum
really?
a couple
Cool.
months back. And yeah, so she was interviewed as part of the. Insai is actually Icelandic for intuition. So she was one of the people that they profiled. But yeah, from what I understand, she sat for 8 hours a day at MoMA, and people stood in line to sit across from her. And they, she didn't call it a holy moment, but what they did was they stared into each other's eyes. And as you saw from the documentary, and I really recommend people check out Insai. I think it's actually
It's on Netflix,
It's on Netflix, yeah. And it's amazing, the tears, the expressions, just the sense of these people just feel, they appear to me that they just feel like, wow, like I'm having a real human connection right now. I'm feeling things that I've always wanted to feel. I'm crying, but it's not it's not sad. It's
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I guess, and this is kind of a weird place to say this, given that it's a podcast, but we tend to talk a lot about everything, and you don't really get a chance to just sit down with somebody and not talk.
Yeah.
And when you're sort of forced to do that for one reason or another, you get to experience things that you don't get to experience so much because we're constantly talking and constantly in communication with each other. And I think that's something that was probably more available to people before there was not only so much technology to distract you, but so much information to distract you, so much information to talk about. If you live in a small village where there's only so many things you could talk about, at some point you're going to have to shut up. Maybe not. Maybe we can always talk about crap.
Yeah, but people love this holy moment. We do it every time. And it's funny because people kind of, it begins with people laughing and snickering, but we do it for 5 minutes.
And it can be, it's not always a pleasant thing.
Yeah, I would probably be uncomfortable at first, no question.
I did some reading on it when I had to speak about consciousness hacking. Even though we co-founded Consciousness Hacking, we're usually in the position of facilitating other people's
when I was there,
talks.
you were basically managing the thing, but not involved in the talk
maybe
yourself.
I'll give a 5-minute intro.
Yeah.
But an hour-long lecture was something I hadn't done before, and I had the opportunity recently to do it at the Strand Bookstore. And for that, I invoked the holy moment, and I did a bit of research on the moment since I had to talk about it. And I found that there was a scientist in Italy who had run an experiment on eye gazing for 10 minutes in a dimly lit room. And what he found was that it oftentimes leads to feelings of disassociation. So it's counterintuitive. Like you think, it's going to be this deep connection with another person. And I think it can be. That disassociation can facilitate a more authentic connection or association. It's like you have to get out of the inauthentic and then in order to re-enter and have established a more authentic association. And so that was interesting, but it really gets at, I think, what this word hacking means to me, in the sense that you start from this sort of assumption that the system is flawed. Like your natural habit patterns of thinking and behaving are in some way causing you problems.
Right.
And so you are responsible for those problems. So like my landlord, you're inadvertently creating your own problems. He was destroying the squirrels, and that was leading to his general demeanor as an asshole, I think.
I hope he doesn't listen to this.
So the hack, is abrupt, and it's not necessarily pleasant. It's an altered state that sort of yokes you or pulls you out of this habit pattern, disassociates you. So the eye gazing disassociates you, and then you have this opportunity to do something What are you going to do with that? Are you just going to get off on it? That's the sort of, just using drugs for having fun, or just
Right.
doing yoga for tight ass or something. What are you going to do with it? If you're a consciousness hacker, you're going to take advantage of that hack or that altered state or that window that you've carved out, and you're going to do something spiritually efficacious with it. So what I'm arguing is that in the holy gaze, it's a little counterintuitive, because you think you're going to fall in love with the person, but I would argue that in order to authentically fall in love with that person, you have to disassociate. And then
Is it disassociating from yourself or from them, or both?
both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's also disassociating from the awkwardness of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
like anything, I mean, beginning any new practice, doing anything new for the first time, there's an awkwardness, especially when you're asked to do something that you don't normally do. You don't know what to expect. So I
Right.
think, again, to have any sort of real connection, you have to be able to circumvent, move beyond, transcend that initial awkwardness of why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And just kind of allow yourself just to surrender, right? I mean, surrender, it's one of those words that no one wants to surrender. I mean, because you think about it, Bhagavad Gita, it's all about war, right? But it's
Right.
also about this existential dilemma. And so I think once and this is actually a word I've been kind of thinking about a lot, especially as I was planning my journey to Peru to do ayahuasca, which maybe we can discuss at some later time on the
I
back
would love
burner.
to.
But
Yeah.
it's you got to surrender to the experience. You got to surrender to whether it be the medicine, the plant, the guru, and I think to ever really have a authentic experience, you've got to kind of get out of your own head. And I think a lot of these modalities we've
Yeah.
been speaking about, whether they be technology, whether it be meditation, whether it be psychedelics, you have to just allow yourself to be open and
Yeah.
humble and vulnerable enough to be like, just show me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know everything.
Yeah. I guess the fear also, though, is surrendering to something that ends up not being a good thing,
Right.
which
Well-
happens a lot.
Well, that's the pendulum effect, right? Like when you look at Buddhist philosophy, like they argue that when you are clinging to the extreme of one idea, like say the extreme of believing everything is essentially real, and then that's dispelled, then the tendency will just swing like a pendulum to the opposite, and
And it's the same thing.
and you'll cling to the non-existence of those things.
Right.
Whereas what's really challenging, and from the Buddhist perspective, what you're aiming for is somewhere in between.
The middle way. Yeah.
The middle way, exactly. This reminds me of the shirt thing again too. Like the moment this woman said "think" to me, it was like the house of cards just crumbling around me, and I realized that was the moment I disassociated, and I realized this whole shirt thing was all about me. It was this narrative structured around this strong clinging to me-ness. And when she said "think," it was just like, I'm a think for buying into that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I bet you didn't know when you bought the shirt that it was going to be so meaningful.
No, no, I didn't. But I do think I thought about that actually. Like, what was I trying to achieve when I bought that shirt? Like when we buy things, we're buying things that we think are accentuating the kind of person we want to be.
Totally.
And
Especially
so,
with clothing. Yeah.
So the think part started with the purchasing of the shirt. Like, I'm constructing this identity, and this is who I want to be. And maybe that person was in fact the guy in the film, because
Right.
I saw that film when I was like 13 years old,
Yeah, it's very possible.
and it permeated my psyche. And then years later, I bought this shirt because of that initial exposure.
It's kind of scary when you notice things like that, right?
Yeah.
Where like, wow, things were so influential on me that I didn't even
Yeah.
notice.
Well, then this was the big epiphany for me. Was this like since I saw that movie, like that's the house of cards that was falling apart. Like all of this was just, ego-driven decorating. Like I was decorating the self.
Does Buddhism? Because I know ego is more of a Freudian concept.
Yeah.
Does Buddhism really address ego as a thing? The first podcast I did was with a friend of mine who took refuge in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery.
Yeah.
And it was on Tibetan Buddhism. He's no scholar, but it was fun. I had a good time, and he taught me a lot. And the idea of ego that he might have mentioned, and that ego is more of a concept that needs to be dealt with in the Western world, whereas in Tibet, ego would not have necessarily been a thing.
What they say is self-clinging is the literal translation, and that's what gets rebranded as egoism.
I see.
But what they're talking about is a psychological tendency that holds on to a metaphysically unrealistic view of personhood. So it's a mistake to say that Buddhists reject ego. They believe in an ego. Ego exists in the same way everything exists. It's a construction. That's not to say that it doesn't matter, and that's certainly not to say that it doesn't exist. It's actually the only way anything can exist. So ego is just as real as anything else. What's a problem is how you hold on to that construction in your own psychology. Do you relate to it in the way that I've been describing as egotistical, which is to give it this larger than life, independent sort of nature, that's not influenced or connected to the world around me, like the opposite of ego grasping is interconnectedness and seeing that the self is this emergent property that comes out of a lot of different pieces, including things outside of you, like that shirt. So it would be a mistake to say that Buddhists reject the idea that I should be clinging, that this shirt shouldn't be meaningful to me, that I shouldn't relate to this shirt as indicating some aspect of my personality that I want to publicly show. Buddhists wouldn't, at least my understanding of, when I say Buddha, there are a lot of different Buddhisms out there. I'm using the word very generally, but they wouldn't dismiss the importance of that or the realism of that. It's more that there is a way in which you can relate to those things that is problematic. And,
I see.
And that's what they want to identify and route out in your daily behavior, because that's the cause of your own suffering. So if you can route that out, then that's how you get to enlightenment.
While we're in semi-metaphysics, I suppose, I'm going to jump it to the next level. What do you guys think, each of you, is the nature of reality? I know that's a crazy question.
It's not crazy. I mean, I think I've been talking about it.
No, you definitely have. You definitely have.
Yeah, and that's very much because of the importance that Madhyamaka Mahayana Buddhists put on that in relationship to everything else.
I mean, that's obviously a big question. I guess I'll maybe though I would.
I will say you have a right to change your mind at any given point in
Yeah,
time.
no.
So as not to get you stuck in your today's definition.
I guess I'll approach it more kind of simply, if you will. This whole notion of cultural conditioning. Who are you really? For me, I grew up in a well-to-do upper middle class family in Western Massachusetts, and it's funny, I never saw myself as a precocious kid, but I remember from a very early age, I don't know, maybe 10, 11, where I became very, very aware of the fact that even though I loved my family, they were, very supportive and loving and caring in every definition of the word, just my surroundings were not contributing to, and maybe probably there was blame, but for whatever reason, my environment was not facilitating me being who I really wanted to be. And I got very lucky. I was able to. I chose to go away to boarding school. I went to this fancy school in Connecticut, and I thought that was going to be my blank slate to kind of create myself on my own terms. Long story short, it actually, I even when I was in high school, and maybe it's true for everyone. High school, no matter where you are, no matter how fancy it is, there's kind of just the growing pains. But what I'm trying to get at is that I think in terms of reality, I think, back to Chris's shirt, labels, in the environment in which we were born, our gene pool. I think for a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with this, they just kind of go along with the flow. They kind of do what they feel is expected of them. they take certain career paths, or they marry certain people because like that they just feel that that's what they're supposed to do based upon the cultural conditioning. And for me, and this is kind of still my journey, is I'm trying to disassociate myself from what I feel the culture at large feels that I should do based upon my gene pool and the environment in which I was raised. And I guess what I just wanted to kind of reveal, which I actually just learned just yesterday, which is actually, I'm still kind of speaking about your mystical experience last night. I guess I had a pretty mystical experience yesterday.
This is great. We scheduled the podcast on a good day.
I was
420 is truly holy.
Yeah.
I was told that I wasn't bipolar. And to me, this was a label that I've lived with for about 12 years. And I've been taking different medications to, that are supposedly mood stabilizers, and I lived with this what I felt was kind of a pathology. And I guess I always saw even though I was on these medications that were designed to, I guess, fix me, I always felt broken because of this label. And to hear yesterday that I'm not bipolar, because I've actually never had a manic episode, even though I've been told by a number of other psychiatrists that I was bipolar. It's like, wow, like I'm not, again, back to cultural conditioning and labels. I felt I was bipolar. And as a result of that, I think the way that I approached the world, the way that I approached myself was, this story, I think, really inhibited me in many ways from ever feeling whole, from ever feeling like I could love myself, because I'm like, damn, no one likes bipolar people. They do stupid shit. They have these manic episodes. But anyway, so I guess, your question about the nature of reality, to me, I guess from a process of trying to understand your own experience of reality, it's just keep asking yourself questions. And this is kind of how I think about the meetups that we try to put together, is what can we create for people that allow people to maybe ask deeper questions about themselves, how they live their lives, and kind of in doing so, kind of exercise themselves, disassociate themselves from cultural conditioning labels that have distracted them from being who they really are, actually living out their essence. And that's why I'm excited about this Enneagram workshop this weekend. I'm like, wow, like, okay, I'm a type 7, and maybe that's another label, but what if I could use this process, this methodology, as a means of being like, okay, you know what, I do have this constructed personality, how can I deconstruct it and push it aside? So yeah, I guess that's kind of my long-winded answer of, for me, the nature of reality is getting rid of this cultural conditioning, these labels that inhibit you from being who you really are. And I think that's very liberating.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, yeah. So you're thinking of going down to Peru. Do you want to talk about this, Peru ayahuasca?
Yeah, well, yes,
Okay.
I'll finish on that. Yeah, so now that I'm not bipolar, I actually canceled my trip to go to Peru because I got freaked out about 3 weeks ago. A friend of mine said, Todd, I've seen a number of people who, if in fact you are bipolar, ayahuasca does produce these as with psychedelics, these psychoses, ideally these healthy psychoses. Obviously, it's all about how you
temporary psychosis.
How you integrate that experience. But he said, listen, if your biology is such that you are prone to having these unhealthy psychotic breaks,
it could potentiate that. Yeah.
It could, you could end up in the hospital. So I'm like, oh fuck, So actually, I canceled my trip. So I'm not going to go down to Peru on May 1st to do ayahuasca. I am going to go again because now I realize, because again, it's about the mindset, right? Again, Chris can speak about this, but I think with any great experience, whether it be psychedelic or just in real life, it's all about, the set and the setting. It's the intention with which you enter the experience, and it's the environment in which you have that experience.
Yeah, I
so
think
now that I just met Julie Holland, who actually convinced me that I'm not bipolar, I feel like I can now, when I eventually do ayahuasca, whether it be here, in the States, or go down and have what I imagine would be maybe a bit more authentic, being in the jungle, being totally out of my element. Yeah, so it's not going to happen on May 1st, but
it's going to happen.
Life's a journey, right? And
Totally.
maybe had I gone down on May 1st, it would not have been a very positive experience, even if my biology knew it wasn't bipolar.
Right, because of your
my
mindset.
mindset. I got so freaked out 3 weeks ago. I'm like,
yeah.
So there's no way for me to go into it and
Right.
really surrender to what the medicine maybe wanted to show me.
Yeah. Do you have a connection already in Peru to who you're going to?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if I want to mention the name
No,
because
no, don't.
because
I was just going to offer you because I know somebody who
Oh, you
went
do?
there.
Okay.
I actually
Yeah.
did a podcast on that too. Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. This one shaman had been recommended to me by a few different people, and so I don't know. I guess maybe I'm keeping his name close.
No,
because-
yeah, you should keep his name
Yeah.
close until he tells you that it's okay to mention it.
yeah.
Cool.
Um,
I hope you have a good time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so maybe we can do this again once I
I
come
would love to
back.
do it again. You guys, by the way, can come back whenever you want,
Cool.
either together or separate.
Yeah.
I would definitely like to do more on Tibetan Buddhism with you. I'll bring my friend. He would love. He asked me to be on the podcast today, but I forgot to tell him that I was doing it today. My bad.
Yeah, so for me, nature of reality is really just exercising yourself of cultural conditioning, and I think that's hard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard because it's
you
constantly
grow up in
being
a
pounded
culture,
into you.
and it's like, okay, like, back to the ring, right? I mean, it's like, diamond rings are beautiful, and it's in our culture, that's what you do to show
Right.
your love and commitment to
Right.
someone else.
Completely prompted by an advertisement, by the way.
Yeah.
Right.
But what happens, just to kind of digress for another quick second, like what happens when, we get to a point, with nanotechnology, and you can actually begin mass producing, 20 karat diamonds, right?
People
Do
are
they
gonna start
lose-
getting killed.
Do they
That's
lose
what's
their
gonna happen.
value because it's so easy to build them?
I would guess that probably not, only because they can already make diamonds to some degree, maybe not 20 karat ones, but they can make diamonds, and there's going to be something special about diamonds that are natural.
Yeah.
And already diamonds are pretty worthless, inherently worthless. There's way more than we need. They just get kept away somewhere so that they can keep the price high
Right.
up. So I don't know that would cause the market to change, although maybe, you never know.
But if the market's all about psychology, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I began my career in Wall Street, and as everyone knows, there's no fundamental value for anything, right?
Right.
I mean, that the price of Apple stock, it's because all these different investors, they literally feel a certain way about Apple's prospects.
Yeah,
They
that's-
discount the future value of what they think Apple was really worth. So there's nothing, the
Yeah, it's
real nature. There's nothing real about it.
The money itself is a fabrication, and then on top of it, the exchange of the stock is
Yeah.
an even higher fabrication. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, they say that the most valuable company 20 years from now is not even around, doesn't even exist.
right.
So, anyway, that's
There's this phrase, consensus reality, and it captures this idea that we are consensually creating reality all the time with these labels and these constructions. And I think, as I was saying before about the pendulum effect, like you can, once you recognize that, and you say, oh, everything's just, a construction, you want to swing, the tendency to cling causes you to swing to the opposite extreme and to cling on to the fact that, well, if everything's just a label, it doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
But what's hard is recognizing the constructions as these things that society and you sort of contribute to, recognizing them as meaningful without reifying them as more than that.
Right. I think that's fair. I think that's a good way to go about it, because you got to live in society, or maybe you don't, but then you'd be a hermit.
But it's choosing the right.
But even if you're a hermit, you're defining yourself in relationship to your distance from
That society, you're still defined by that.
You can't get away from the web. It's like we're all interconnected, even if
Yeah.
you're off the grid.
Fair enough.
But it's about choosing your story, about choosing your myth. I remember this great quotation by the journalist novelist Joan Didion, and she famously said, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. So you have to have some story. You have to have some myth.
Yeah.
There's a book I just read called Sapiens, and part of the thing, it basically goes from the beginning of Homo sapiens to the possible futures. And one of the things that the guy who writes the book, I think it's Yuval Noah Harari, he says that what differentiated Homo sapiens from other hominids that made them become as powerful and as large as we are today is the ability to create myth. And that's what made us go another way, because you can keep a community together of about 150 people just based on gossip and being able to talk about each other. But after that 150 number, it's practically impossible to do. So what what Homo sapiens did, which made them able to expand to larger numbers, is the ability to create a myth that we can all agree upon. So, as Americans, for example, we all agree on the myths of America, which may or may not be true, but we all agree on them, and therefore we can theoretically all go out, fight to die, and back each other up because we believe in the same myth, or whether that's a religion, or whatever the myth might be. So it's similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny. I haven't read *Sapiens*, but he has a new book out called Homo Deus. This is Yuval Noah Harari, and I think the premise of the book is he's talking about how I shouldn't say it's the premise of the book, but he speaks about the future of AI, right? Where these machines, these algorithms, they may not have the same level of consciousness or self-awareness. And again, consciousness is obviously a word that people disagree on how you actually define it. But
right.
What happens in the future when these machines will be, and they already are, smarter from a logical, from a memory standpoint.
Sure.
But someone actually I'd love to have at one of our meetups. He actually studies the ethics of robotics, the ethics of AI. In the future, 10, 20, depending upon who you talk to, whether it be Ray Kurzweil or whoever it is. What humans aren't the smartest species anymore. If in fact you begin referring to robots and machines as a new species.
Totally.
So we have to begin thinking about, well, does this AI, does this smarter consciousness, is it going to want us around in 10, 20, 30, 40 years? So,
I guess that the questions there also depend on, we assume that these smarter consciousnesses are going to, consciousnesses, I don't know how to pluralize that.
You want to do a Latin thing, say conscious.
Consci.
Consci.
That it's going to necessarily react to things in the same way that we react. But if it is indeed smarter than us or more understanding, more intelligent, it may react very differently. It may keep us around.
Yeah.
But I think it was, I don't remember who it was that I heard it from, saying that they could also evolve to such a degree where they can become so different and so much more than us that it would be kind of the difference between a human and a cat for what we're seeing, and then they could do things that we would never imagine.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing.
And
that
actually,
this is a real conversation.
Speaking of the author of *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*, he actually he did do a Goenka Vipassana retreat, I think 5 or 10 years ago, when actually he was getting his PhD at Oxford. And your listeners should check him out. He's done a number of podcasts recently since this book just came out. But he was saying when he was at Oxford, he was studying history, and he just got so kind of bogged down in all this information. And I think one of his friends recommended doing one of these 10-day silent meditation, these Vipassana retreats. I'm not sure where he did it, whether he's Israeli. I'm not sure if he went to India or where. But he got so much out of this 10-day retreat. He actually does do the practice every day, which is an hour of meditation in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. Wow. And actually 60 days out of the year, he does a silent meditation retreat. So he was saying, I guess, he did it back in October, November.
Did you say 60?
So he was on,
wow.
And he does it every year. And I guess he was on retreat during the election, so the American election. So he didn't even know who won until he came out of it. But he's actually I did a 10-day retreat as well. And I do about an hour every day. But he was saying that for him, because he's been asked on a number of occasions by Tim Ferriss and a lot of different prominent podcasters, you got to get him on your show as well.
I would love to. If you get him on Consciousness Hacker, send him my way.
But he speaks about how his meditation practice just allows him to sift through what is important to him. It kind of allows him to separate the wheat from the chaff. And,
it's so interesting,
and really focus on what he feels to be most important. And I think he would go on to say that he's able to parse human history and maybe foresee the future more clearly because of the nature of his
I'll tell you, I've
practice.
Never read a book that was written so much. It seemed like an alien commenting on human society, like he was completely disconnected from it. Yeah. I never would have thought of him as a meditator, given the scientific nature of the book.
It's funny. No one knew about this until he published his most recent book. Yeah, he does 2 hours a day,
it's crazy.
And he's gone for 60. And again, the average person says, 60 days, like you're like wasting your life. But I think he would say the exact opposite.
Yeah. I would
It's now
love
Chris's turn to define reality. Then we probably have to get going,
I
right?
forgot.
to.
I was thinking of so much when you were talking, and one of the things I was thinking of was there's a book based on one of the first dialogues between the Dalai Lama and scientists. I believe it's called Gentle Bridges, and I think it took place in the late 80s, early 90s, probably late 80s. So this was a transcript of a conference, and in the conference, the Dalai Lama is in dialogue with these artificial intelligence developers who are really pushing him to say that Buddhism could get behind the idea that sentient AI is possible, that AI is in fact possible. And the Dalai Lama said, well, according to Buddhism, we need certain prerequisites, right? So would AI have this? Would AI have this? Would AI have this? And they're going, yes, 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 yes. And he goes, well, then it would, from my perspective, we can call that consciousness. We can call that entity a sentient being. And they're like, wow. And then the next question was, well, Buddhists believe in reincarnation. So what does that say about reincarnation? And he says, well, it says that people who are very interested in this topic and really familiarize themselves with AI would be candidates for being
Reincarnating as an AI.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I
Isn't
love
that
it. Yeah.
But I bring that up because Buddhist cosmology, this sort of idea that we're consciousness doesn't just go away, that it's changing all the time. It's a mistake to think of rebirth as reincarnation. Like you are not the same person from life to life. What there is there's continuity of immaterial stuff, conscious stuff, awareness. When you are in a religious sort of landscape that acknowledges this continuity of consciousness, it really changes the way you think about yourself and other species. Obviously, there's the harm aspect that we talked about before, but just in terms of computer intelligence, it's like, well, it's in other words, it's not so alien. It's where so many people are worried about computers taking over the world and this big war between the humans and the robots. But what I'm suggesting is that we share much more in common with them. That should we have this ability to create a vessel that could hold consciousness, that consciousness is the same as the consciousness we have, and it's not coming from some other place. It's
That's a fair point. I've never heard it said quite like that. I like that.
So there's an intimacy there that you share between cats and dogs, and you share between with robots potentially. There's a wonderful sort of adage about Buddhism where they talk about this sort of family scene where like the family's sitting down to dinner and the kids are screaming and the father is yelling at the wife, and somebody's kicking the dog, and then there's like the rebirth sort of version of that, which says, the father and the wife used to be mortal enemies in their last life, and now they're lovers, which is really interesting because the intimacy of hatred and love is very similar. It's both very intimate.
I think
personal.
there's a famous Hindu story. I think it's a Hindu story. I heard it from Alan Watts. I think.
Yeah.
Of somebody asking. I think it was. I don't remember. It might have been Shiva. Who will come to you first? Somebody who loves you or somebody who hates you?
Yeah.
And the answer is somebody who hates me because they think about me more.
Yeah. It's that intimacy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, that was something that I was thinking of that I thought I'd put on the record here. But in terms of nature of reality, I mean, I think we've sort of been saying it all along.
Yeah, I think so. That's fair.
And there's the view I have, which you could spin as Buddhist Madhyamaka or Richard Rorty, who's one of my favorite Western philosophers. It's just this idea that there is no intrinsic nature to anything, which is to say that there's nothing that stands outside the web of relations, and that meaning is an emergent property that comes about through the confluence of all these relationships. And that's not to denigrate or dismiss emergent properties. It's actually to say that is where real meaning comes from. And so, as a spiritual practitioner, the trick is to recognize that without reifying or clinging to it, to recognize that everything's a construction without dismissing it as inconsequential, and without giving it more consequentiality than it deserves.
Fair enough.
It's that middle way again, and that's a struggle. That's really hard.
Sure.
Yeah, the one thing that's funny, I began. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of this. What is her name? It's called. It's a book. It's called The Artist's Way. Julia Cameron, and I think like 20 or so years ago, she published this book, and essentially the book, it's designed to help you become more creative. But I think but at the core, it's about being and acting more in tune with your, to use the word I keep using, essence. Anyway, it's a 12-week long program, and part of the program is what's called morning pages. So every morning you wake up, and first thing you do is you go to this journal and you write out 3 pages. And it's not designed to be creative writing. It's you're not if you're an aspiring writer of any kind, it's not where you're trying to write the next Moby Dick or Ulysses or whatever it is, but it's kind of a consciousness dump. So you kind of write, and I've been doing this actually. I did my first week last week, and I just bring this up in terms of nature of reality, because what I've been finding is that once you get out all these ideas and thoughts and back to self-love and these criticisms, which I think most of us are really, really good at doing, once you get a lot of these ideas like out of your head, it's amazing how clarifying and calming it can be for the rest of your day. And again, once you get all this junk, if you will, out of your head, it's amazing how much more clearly and creatively you can begin thinking. So I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of junk that we, stories, metaphors we use. It's funny, in this journaling, in these morning pages, I also kind of came to this realization that one of the metaphors, one of the stories that I've been telling myself, and I think a lot of people, if I can project, tell themselves, is that life is a race. For the longest time, and again, maybe it's back to the fact that according to the Enneagram, I'm a type 7 and I want to do everything, but end up doing a whole lot of nothing. But as I've been kind of journaling and kind of just, conversing with myself about this metaphor of life being a race, I'm like, well, what if I could change that metaphor? What if I could change the story of actually, Todd, who was the one that convinced you or told you that was the metaphor that you were going to live your life under? And I think for the past 41 years, that has been the metaphor. And so now I'm actually slowly kind of giving myself permission to construct a new metaphor. And, we hear life is a journey, and for me, for whatever reason, that didn't really work very well. So my new metaphor is that life is simply an experiment. And I'm trying to kind of work with that right now in this journaling and in my meditation. And I think for me, it's allowing me to kind of slow down and be much more in the moment. But I just wanted to bring that up because I think there are a lot of labels and stories, and in this case, metaphors that can hold us back from just, being who we want to be.
100%.
Yeah, so this morning pages is, in I don't know, I guess part of what inspired me to do this is that I listened to a Tim Ferriss podcast, and I guess he's been doing this, and I guess this guy Brian Koppelman. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the show Billions,
No.
but I guess he's the writer for Billions. It's I think it's an HBO or Showtime show. And after he did his 12 weeks of this of morning pages, that's actually what kind of gave him the idea for the show. So. I think it's for me. It's getting rid of this junk. That's these junky ideas that get in the way of you actually doing what it is. Yeah, you were supposed to do, or you really want to do.
That's great. Let's end it there. I do want to ask you guys to promote yourselves. How do people find you? Is there anything you want to promote? Obviously, consciousness hacking you want to promote. So go ahead and start with that, I suppose.
So you can find out about consciousness hacking at our meetup site, which is Consciousness Hacking NYC. There are other chapters of consciousness hacking on Meetup, but if you're trying to find us, we are Consciousness Hacking NYC. I have a personal website, which is psychonaut.nyc. That's where you can find out about things I'm doing. I have a talk coming up in a couple weeks at the Strand Bookstore where I'm going to be talking about the dark comedy of comedians like Louis C.K. and Tibetan Buddhism. So if you're into dark comedy and deconstructionist thinking, this is the talk for you.
When is this?
I forget the date. It's
all
like
right. It's on the website, right?
2 weeks from now, or 2.5, 3 weeks.
I'll put it up on the show notes anyway.
Oh, great.
I'll find it and put it up.
But it's at Strand Bookstore, which is a really great place to do talks. And just one thing I wanted to say about consciousness hacking was, I was thinking about this last night. My trip when I was sitting in the subway, and it was late at night, and the crews were out cleaning up the subways, and there's just grime everywhere. There's dirt everywhere. It's just, you really get this sense when you're in the subways late at night of the city as this sort of superorganism that's oozing, mysterious liquids from its sides, and these guys who have to clean that up, and the trains and the construction, and it's this real work in progress, and it's usually not very pretty. There are pretty parts of the city, but this is not Paris.
Right.
We are not that kind of city. Where our beauty lays is in the human resources. And you look around at the people, and you talk to them, and you realize that's what New York City is. And so consciousness hacking to me is representative of the best of New York, in that we are hosting human resources, and we're engaging in one of the greatest liberties of what it means to be American, and that's free expression. One of the really sad things that I've seen in recent weeks is a kind of self-censorship in light of the new political climate, and fewer people talking openly about psychedelics, fewer people wanting to go on the record. That to me is really sad, because that is the very anti-American
I couldn't agree more.
sentiment. So
Yeah. Anything else to add?
Yeah, so for me, so as I was saying, I have this startup called Sensoka. We actually may be changing the name. So we've been kind of in stealth mode for a number of years now. So in terms of what you can find out about Sensoka, not a whole lot right now, but hopefully there will be some news. And I certainly would love to present the technology if...
when you release technology, totally come back on. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. So I'd love to do that. And Chris and I actually have been talking about potentially launching a podcast at some point in time, and hopefully that will maybe come to fruition. And I myself have been thinking about launching my own podcast, and I actually just registered, if you will, the name Contrarian. So I'm hopefully going to be launching a podcast called Contrarian, and kind of as
get the website immediately.
why do you want contrarian?
exactly. Yeah. So I think as is my nature, I like to really look at ideas that are maybe conventionally thought of a certain way and kind of flip them on their head.
I'd be happy to help you out with any know-how for podcasting.
Awesome.
I'd be happy to help.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And then just in terms of my social media presence, actually, it's been somewhat minimal over the past several months. But I think for me, the way that I do typically interact social media wise is on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is just my name, Todd Galen, Gailun, all one word.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much,
Thank
Christopher
you.
Kelly,
Thank
Todd
you.
Galen.
Thanks all.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Let me shut this off. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, you can reach me by checking out my website, thegeneralistpodcast.com. You can contact me through there. My email, thegeneralistpodcast@gmail.com. My Twitter handle, @thegeneralistpc. My Instagram, @thegeneralistpodcast. It's pretty uniform, except for the Twitter with the PC thing, because it couldn't fit the podcast. The Generalist. But anyway, you know how to reach me. Help support the show by, as I said earlier, donating to the website. Soon, donating via Patreon. I'll have that up. I'll let you guys know when it's up. Or using our Amazon link, buying the books that I put into show notes through the Amazon link. You can just click right there in the show notes. Any books that we mentioned in the show, they'll be on there. Otherwise, the next episode will be in 2 weeks, and I will let you know what the subject of that one is. I have 2 that I'm debating between putting them next week. So tune back in. You could always check on the website. I usually at some point put up the next episode on the upcoming episode section. Have a good one. We'll see you in 2 weeks.